Everybody, welcome. We are starting First Samuel chapter 13 today. I hope you're doing well. Guess we're getting close to halfway through the book. That's crazy. It didn't seem like that long ago we started it. Okay, we've got another interesting chapter ahead of us, and let's go ahead and pray, and we'll jump in. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this time today, Lord, to study your word. We thank you for your word and how it nourishes us and teaches us. Even these stories, Father, especially these stories, help us see how you operate in human affairs and how we are to operate. And I pray for each of the viewers today, as well as myself, Lord, that we will grow closer to you, that will know you better and know your heart better, and learn to align ourselves better with you. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Okay, so 1 Samuel chapter 13. Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in the mountains of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people he sent away, every man to his tent. Now, I hope you were reading along with me. I every now and then, so I remind, you should have your Bible in front of you so you can read the words with me. Don't just listen as I'm reading, if you can help it. Or if you happen to be driving, if you're listening to this while you're driving, then, put a mental note when you get home or later in the day, go back and read this chapter after we've talked about it. So you can read the words for yourself. Doesn't good, hearing teaching of the word is not the same as consuming the word, right, on your own. We have to study the Bible on our own, as well as receive teaching on it. Receiving teaching is good, but what's necessary is for you to read and study the Bible on your own. So part of what I am trying to do as I teach you is to help you learn how to do that so you can feed yourself. Okay, now this is the very first verse is a little confusing, and even in the footnotes of some study Bibles, you see, like in mine, it says the Hebrew is hard here. We're not sure what it means. Well, if you look at it, it's not that hard. It just says, because it says Saul reigned 1 year when he'd reigned 2 years. Let me just kind of read to you the actual Hebrew words. And you can see it's really not that complicated. Literally it says, son of 1 year, Saul reigned, and 2 years had reigned over Israel. So, but what it really is just basically saying is, Saul completed an entire year of reign over Israel. And in his second year, that's what it means. That's all it means. When in the old days, in ancient times, kings would date their reigns, or people would date the king's reigns differently. Like sometimes there's a criticism laid up against the dating of the the Israel kings versus the kings of Judah, as portrayed in Samuel versus Chronicles, or Kings, First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles, etc. And they say that the dates don't quite line up; they're a little bit off, things like that. And what they're not taking into account is how kingships were measured. So there's some systems would call the first, like the day one. Let's say that the Jewish New Year in ancient Israel was beginning on the 1st of Nisan, which is usually going to fall in March or April, usually April. But let's say the king starts reigning in September. Okay. Well, some dating systems, there was one system they would use where they would say that the moment the king reigned that first in September, that was his first year of reign. And then when he got around to the new year on Nisan, then that was counted as his second year. Then so the ascension year was being counted. In other dating systems, they would say no, he started reigning in September, but it doesn't really count as a year until we get to Nisan, and then beginning the new year in Nisan, that is the first year of his reign, first full year of his reign. And then you had other issues where sometimes there was a son that was co-reigning with his father for a period of time, etc. So in this case, it's just saying Saul completed a full year of reign. And then in the second year, some point in the second year, this is what happened. He chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash in the mountains of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people he sent away, every man to his tent. If you want to really have a good visual of what this chapter is going to talk about, as far as the battle and what's going on, you can go to Google Maps and type in Geva, spelled Geva, Israel. And you will see a city there highlighted called Geva Benjamin, which is Geva of Benjamin. It's Gibeah of Benjamin. It's the same city referenced here in 2. And some people identify Gibeah as a little further south, and Geba, which we're going to see in verse 3, is the one I just told you. I think they were really the same city. The Hebrew word is very similar. I think when you look up Geva on Google Maps, Geva, that little city at the foot of a hill is Gibeah in Scripture. And then there's a hill. Both words mean hill. And then the hill that Gibeah was at the foot of was Geba for them, is what we're calling Geba. And the Philistine garrison was on top of that hill. And then if you look at that on Google Maps, and then you kind of zoom out a little, look north, you're going to see another town north of Geba called Michmash. And that is Michmash here. It's still there today. And you'll see some mountains in between them with some twisty ravines. And those ravines are key to the next chapter. Anyways, the situation is there is a Philistine garrison, a garrison of the enemies, up on this hill in between Michmash and Gibeah. Gibeah is where Saul lives. Michmash was another town, north and south. So the Philistine garrison was used to do raids, to enforce Philistine taxes, laws, tributes, because they were kind of ruling over the people of Israel and oppressing them. And even though Saul has been reigning, even though he's their king, the Philistines have been controlling things still, as we're going to see at the end of this chapter. So this garrison is a thorn in their side. It's a fort. You can't just walk in. It's got guards. They have soldiers in there. They've got horses in there, chariots. They ride out and they do damage when they want to. If people rebel, they're riding out of there. A garrison is like an outpost used to control a people that's far away from your capital. So this is what the Philistines were doing. This was far away from the Philistine homeland over in Gaza, but they're using this little outpost to control the local population so they can't rebel, and they pay their taxes or their tributes, whatever you want to call it. Probably tribute, because they weren't like doing governmental things for Israel. So Saul's got 3,000 men. 2,000 are with him in the northern city of Michmash on the north of this garrison. 1,000 are in the south in Gibeah. And then it says the rest of the people he sent away, every man to his tent. So he said, yeah, 3,000's enough for this job. So I'm going to send the rest of you away. I don't know if that was a good move. We'll see in a minute. And Jonathan attacked the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba. And the Philistines heard of it. So Jonathan went up and attacked the garrison up there on the hill. And not Saul. Saul's got 2,000 men. But Jonathan does it. Once again, Saul's got fear. He's afraid to get things going. He's got these men. He's like, so why has the situation even come about, most likely? Well, he's reigned a full year, and the people are like, look, we made you king. We made you king to get rid of our oppressors, and we're still oppressed. What's going on, Saul? And so in the second year, he's like, I got to do something. All right, 3,000 men. I mean, a garrison doesn't have 3,000 men in it. That would be a full-blown military base. That'd be a large city for them. So the garrison does not have that many. If it has dozens, that's probably something. So he's got 2,000 men, overkill for this garrison, sending men away. Say, yeah. I'm going to pretend like I'm showing faith here because 2,000, we got it with 3,000 total. We can handle this garrison. I would think you could, Saul. And even then, he doesn't act. Jonathan does. Jonathan with half the people, half the forces. He's like, let's go. And he just attacks. He's sick of it. The Philistines heard it. Now Saul takes action. What does he do? Blows the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. Okay? Now all Israel heard, it was said that Saul had attacked a garrison of the Philistines. Okay, well, Saul didn't. Jonathan did. Jonathan, his son. But, okay. We say Bill Gates did this or Bill Gates did that, and he doesn't really, his people in his company doing it. You say this general did that. It's really their whole military, their army under them that did it, not them by themselves. So it's not a lie. But it's still, just pointing out, he didn't actually do it. Jonathan did it. There's nowhere it says Saul told Jonathan to do it. Because if Saul told Jonathan to do it, why isn't he helping? Why is it just Jonathan going up from Gibeah? Why isn't Saul a part of the little battle? So Saul's response is, oh boy, Jonathan actually attacked their garrison, so now we got to do something. So now out of fear, blow the trumpet, let the Hebrews hear. Now all Israel heard it said that Saul had attacked a garrison of the Philistines, and that Israel had also become an abomination to the Philistines. And the people were called together to Saul at Gilgal. So Saul blew the trumpet. Obviously, he's blowing it. Is he blowing it himself? I don't know. But he's got, at least men are blowing it for him. No one's hearing it from where he is in the rest of Israel. He's sending out messengers who are going from village to village, town to town, and they're blowing the trumpet. So when it says Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, it means he sent messengers throughout all the land to blow, the shofar trumpets. They would arrive in a village and go, and the people would come out to see what's going on. He says, I'm here in the name of King Saul. He has attacked the garrison of the Philistines in Gibeah, and he's calling all of Israel to come down and fight. Come to Gilgal. Remember, Gilgal is the place where they are gathering for official kingly business or government business. It's that circle of stones, kind of like a Stonehenge. It is a Stonehenge. Then the Philistines gathered together to fight with Israel. So the Philistines are not taking this lightly. 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. That is a lot. That's a big army. That's intimidating. 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen. So the 30,000 chariots, that was the tank of their day. So the 6,000 horsemen would just be loose cavalry, I guess. And the 30,000 chariots have multiple horses. So you've got at least 66,000 horses total, because these chariots are going to be pulled most likely by 2 horses. And just infantry, as the sand which is on the seashore. So they've got, if they've got that many chariots and that many cavalry, it's not inconceivable they have, uh, maybe approaching 100,000 men, 100,000 men. So you got, or more. So this is very intimidating to the people of Israel. And they came up and encamped in Michmash. So Saul took his 2,000 men. He left Michmash, which is, think of, if you look again at this map, imagine Jerusalem here. Well, I don't know how you guys are going to see it on the camera. So Jerusalem is here, and then Gibeah and Michmash are up here. Well, from my perspective, this is the way to the Dead Sea. So I guess from your perspective, that would be the way to the Dead Sea. So Gilgal is that way. It's towards the Dead Sea. So Saul left Michmash, went to the Dead Sea, and they came up, and then the Philistines encamped where he was, to the east of Beth Aven. Now, Beth Aven, there's two possible meanings. One would seem to be house of wickedness or house of iniquity. Another possible is house of trouble. But then there's a completely different possible meaning, which is house of plenty. Now, I just think that the people are probably not going to name their own town house of iniquity. They're probably naming it house of plenty. But then there's this play on words where it could also be related to trouble and iniquity. So this town is kind of a prosperous town, very fertile area possibly. The Philistines are now coming from it, and camping near it in a representation of they're coming from the house of iniquity. So the secondary meaning is being associated with them. When the men of Israel saw that they were in danger, for the people were distressed. Okay, so yeah, Saul started with 3,000 men, didn't have the courage to really do the attack himself. His son does it. But then he goes down to Gilgal, and you got hundreds of thousands, possibly, Philistines coming up. The people would be distressed. And it says the people hid in caves, in thickets, in rocks, in holes, and in pits. So the people are they're trying to find any hidey hole they can. Cisterns, you name it. I mean, they're just tombs probably. And some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. So they're crossing back across the Jordan River to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. They're really panicked. You got a lot of them just fleeing completely. We're not responding to your call, Saul. We don't have that kind of faith in you. Look at this army that's come against us. 30,000 chariots. And so they just flee. Now, it should be noted that in this hilly terrain, if Israel was smart and if Saul was smart as a military leader, you would do the fighting in these valleys and ravines because the chariots and horsemen can't do squat there. Those are useless. So you're going to resign them all to infantry. And then if you could come up with a moderately comparable size infantry and be smart about how you attack, you could actually do well. But as for Saul, he was in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. There's a lot of fear here. Then he waited 7 days, according to the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So, obviously, Saul is going to get, if you know this chapter, you know Saul's about to do a very large mistake in his life. And it's because he ran out of patience and did not wait on Samuel. And he's going to end up offering the sacrifice himself. If we read a little more, So Saul said, "Bring a burnt offering and a peace offering here to me." And he offered the burnt offering to God. Now it happened, as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering, that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him. So Saul is happy to see Samuel. And Samuel says, "What have you done?" Saul said, "When I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, then I said, the Philistines will now come down on me at Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering." And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." Then Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin, and Saul numbered the people present with him, about 600 men. Okay, so first, let's put ourselves in Saul's shoes. Obviously, we know the judgment of the Lord is that Saul did something very wrong here. But I first want to highlight how difficult it would be for anyone, for most people, in his shoes. So he's already got insecurity. We see a lot of insecurity in Saul. He definitely does not have a strong relationship with God himself, but he has an affection for God, and he does believe to some degree. He had that experience, spiritual experience, where he was prophesying a few chapters ago. And so, and we see here that he says, I have not made supplication to the Lord. It's like, I have to fight. The Philistines are coming. And I couldn't make the sacrifice. And I was afraid they were going to attack before I could say, "God, I love you. I want to worship you. We need you." I wasn't able to do that in the official way. And I wanted to make sure we'd done it, because I didn't want to fight without God. I mean, that sounds very spiritual, very biblical even. Like he's got a heart for God. And that does seem sincere, like he really was concerned, or at least he was concerned the people wouldn't want to go fight without having done that. And that could easily be just as likely, knowing Saul. But he's got this huge, he's already had insecurity and fear. He's got this huge, more than 100,000 men coming towards him that are camped already up there waiting, and he's fearfully coming. Samuel had told him, "Wait 7 days," in a previous chapter. "When you go to Gilgal, wait for me 7 days before you do the sacrifice." To Saul's credit, he waited 7 days. He's got this army, a massive army up there, and he is waiting the full 7 days. Now, on the flip side, you could say, well, but wasn't he scared originally? I mean, it was Jonathan who attacked, not him. So maybe he's kind of happy to wait there 7 days. He thinks this is 7 days more of life I have. So maybe we don't give him so much credit for that. Nevertheless, he did wait, but people were bleeding off from him, okay? To the point where he only has 600 men left, down from the 3,000. So they attacked a garrison successfully that only had dozens of Philistines. They thought they needed 3,000 men to do that. He makes a call for more to come, and instead of getting more, he loses 2,400 out of 3,000. What is that? That's 80%. He lost 80% of his men, just kind of sneaking away, running off to Gad and Gilead, and hiding in hidey holes and wherever else. So from a human perspective, there's a reason to be afraid and concerned. It's like, look, I waited the 7 days. I've only got 600 men left. I'm losing all my men. What is Yahweh expecting from me? To his credit, it seems like he said, I have to do this because I got to go fight. I've got 600 men left. I got to at least keep these. So in that moment, he had at least some faith. He's like, well, I'm going to go fight even with it 600. I mean, what else am I going to do? Go hide like everybody else? How would I remain king after that? But then I guess in another way, that's also a lack of faith, because David certainly fled from Saul for I don't know how many years, like 7 years, I think, with a couple hundred men hiding in caves and things like that, running away. Saul, in theory, could have had the same kind of period. He could have done the same thing. He didn't have to be always acting in fear. It's like everything he does is out of fear. And fear is the opposite of faith. This is really the main lesson we need to be taken from Saul's life. You must leave fear. As we're moving into the end times, the last days here in the United States and the world, you must not be like Saul and these people. You must be like David if you want to do well. Be like David. David showed up in front of Goliath, and the whole army is like, I don't care that I'm 15 years old and all I've got is a sling. You've insulted the name of my Lord, my God, and you're going down. That's faith. That's faith. May we have that kind of faith and not Saul's level of faith. Nevertheless, what is the problem? What is it that Saul did wrong? Well, Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. So Samuel is saying, you had an amazing opportunity here, Saul. This was a test of faith. If you had just waited and followed the commandment of the Lord your God, no matter how many men left you, get it down to 200 like David or Gideon. He had a previous example of Gideon defeating an entire army with just a couple hundred. All right. So he knew his history. He knew about Gideon in that story and other miraculous stories. And he had reason. He already had historical examples that he could have chosen to use to give him faith that God could conquer these Philistines even with 200 men, even with 20 men. But he didn't have that level of faith. But Samuel's he's kind of grieving here. He's upset. He's like, you could have had the kingdom established forever. This was a test of faith. If you had passed this test, if you had just waited, God would have established your kingdom forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart. He's referring to King David, who's coming. And the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. So the Lord will only wants a commander over his people who will not fail to follow the commands of the Lord, of Yahweh. God doesn't want an unfaithful general. He wants a general who's going to carry out his instructions to the T, and without any variations. So what exactly was the commandment that Saul didn't keep? Most teachers I've heard talk about how he didn't wait for Samuel and that was the commandment. Yes, it's related to not waiting on Samuel, but this wasn't the instruction. It wasn't about this instruction Samuel gave him to wait 7 days, because he did wait 7 days and Samuel still didn't come. It's almost like it came on the 8th day, or like right after this, or in the late in the 7th day or something. Saul's like, well, it's the 7th day. Uh, just go ahead, let's do it. And then it's almost like Samuel showed up right after that. Um, maybe he was even waiting to see what would happen. But the commandment that Saul is breaking is the commandment that only a Levite can offer sacrifices, or really a priest. And in this case, that was the problem. He's not a Levite. He is not a descendant of Aaron, and Saul is offering the sacrifice as if he were, and he's the king. He's the tribe of Benjamin. This is, again, usurping the role of Messiah. The king cannot do priestly duties. He cannot step into the role of the church. He cannot lead worship. The king's job is to lead the army and execute justice in the name of God and under the authority of God. The church, or the priests, in this case, their job is to lead people to the correct worship of Yahweh and teach them who he is and what his laws are. And so the king is overstepping. He's violating separation of church and state. He is conducting worship, okay, when he's supposed to wait for the God's prophet to do that. That is how he violated the commandment. We see another vigorous response by God to Uzziah later, who was a good king of Judah, who entered into the temple in pride to offer a sacrifice. And there was a great earthquake immediately because God was outraged that another king of Israel or Judah would attempt to take the Messiah's role of both king and priest. Only Jesus can do that. And the earthquake caused a crack in the temple wall. A beam of sunlight came through, and leprosy struck Uzziah on the forehead, and leprosy broke out, and he was a leper for the rest of his day, leprosy being a symbol of pride. So that's what's going on. Saul has acted as if he's at the level of the Messiah. Only the Messiah can be both king and priest. Doesn't matter how many days you wait. Doesn't matter how stressed you are. Doesn't matter how fearful you are. Doesn't matter how big the army is. Better to die than usurp Jesus' role as king and priest, to try to be the head of the body. 600 men, 6 is the number of man, it's incomplete. So this is indicative that this army is not complete without Yahweh's help. Now, in verse 16, Saul, Jonathan his son, and the people present with them remained in Gibeah of Benjamin, but the Philistines encamped in Michmash. So Saul's fears were not realized. They weren't making any moves down to Gilgal. They stayed in Michmash. They have another plan. And so Saul and his 600 men come up to Gibeah. And they're like, okay, what are we going to do? We got 600. Somehow we got to take these guys on. There's these mountains between them. Then it says, then raiders came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned onto the road to Ophrah. That's not Oprah. That's Ophrah. To the land of Shual. Another company turned to the road of Beth Horon. And another company turned to the road of the border that overlooks the valley of Zeboim toward the wilderness. Now, that the first one is going north from Michmash, further north. The second one going to Beth Horon is to go to going to the west towards the Mediterranean, back towards the land of the Philistines. And another company turned to the valley of Zeboim, which does go down to Gilgal, down those ravines. So, but these were raiding parties. They weren't really these weren't going to do pitched battles. They were going to just raid villages and towns and attack and plunder and say, you guys are going to attack one of our garrisons, huh? Well, let's exact some revenge. Let's show you why you don't do that. And I looked at the names of these towns and what they mean. I don't know if we can get meaning out of them, but if you 1 and 2. The name Beth Horon means house of freedom or house of the freedmen. It can also mean house of the hollow or the cave, but I think freedman is better given its history and how it was founded. Ophrah means a young female deer. Okay. And Zeboim means the valley of Zeboim is the valley of the hyenas, which are known for like small, mocking, laughing little animals, that attack. They're small, but they're laughing. So, in a sense, you could compare the Israelites, what they were doing to the Philistines, as being much like the activity of hyenas in the eyes of the Philistines rather than like lions, because these are little guys in the Philistines' eyes who are just mocking and laughing and, doing little attacks, but not a ferocious enemy in their eyes. So you could say they're going to, attack, like the picture that Ophrah, that meaning elicits is, like a young female deer just prancing the mountains freely. You've got Beth Horon, the house of the freedmen. So they're attacking their joy, their freedom, and their mocking. So maybe I'm stretching. Verse 19, now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords or spears, but all the Israelites would go down to the Philistines to sharpen each man's plowshare, his mattock, his axe, and his sickle. And the charge for sharpening was a pim for the plowshares, the mattocks, the forks, and the axes, and to set the points of the goads. The goads are things that you put on the side of a goat or a horse so it won't kick. The little sharp things. So it came about on the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and Jonathan his son. And the garrison of the Philistines went out to the pass of Michmash. Okay, so now we see another reason why Israel is afraid, why the people are afraid. They don't have any weapons. They have farm instruments. They don't have swords. Out of these 600 men, out of the 3,000 men, only Saul and Jonathan have swords and spears, actual weapons of war. Everybody else has pitchforks and axes. Okay, that's all they've got. So they're up against this highly technological army, the Philistines, with the 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and all these infantry, and guaranteed all of them have swords. So this was intimidating. I mean, in their minds, what they're talking about is we got no chance. Okay, this would be like, this would be like maybe a small Latin American country deciding it's going to take on the full military of the United States and win. But they don't have nukes, they don't have aircraft carriers, they don't have all those things. That would be the intimidation factor. So it was required. God was requiring a lot of faith for Israel, from Israel, but also from Saul. He was requiring a lot of faith. He was requiring them to have faith that even with no weapons and hardly any men, you're going to overcome in the name of God these enemies oppressing you. Although there's no evidence that Saul asked God's opinion if it was time to attack the Philistines in the beginning. He didn't go ask Samuel to ask God. He just gathered men and out of pressure from people, and Jonathan then did it. So even then, he's not confident. Well, is God going to be with me? He didn't tell me to do this. We started this whole process. So, but lest you feel sorry, said well, God is asking Saul to have so much faith. Why is he so hard on him? Because that would have been hard to have that much. Yes, it would have been hard to have that much faith. But Saul wants to be king of Israel. And much of whom much is given, much is expected. If you want to be a leader for God over, in this situation, like a king over Israel, he is going to require you to not be the normal man. You can't have normal levels of faith for him to approve of your kingship and be with you. You must obey better than any other man, and you must have a greater faith than any other man, or you're not fit. That's God's perspective. If you're going to lead my people, he says, you must rise to a higher standard than any others. So, anyways, basically the Philistines with their oppression, if they found out that a group of Israelites were creating swords, then they would have immediately raided and attacked that community, thinking that they're rising up in rebellion. Again, the Philistines aren't providing a governmental system like the Roman Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire. They're just oppressing. They're just like, we're not going to provide you with any services, no roads, no aqueducts, no justice, no courts. We're just going to take your money when we want to, and we're going to keep you poor. And if we find out that you guys are trying to do anything to lift yourselves up, we're going to come attack and kill. That's what the Philistines were doing. So, but to make this a simpler process, the Philistines had just made a rule and said, and to keep it from being an issue, you're not allowed to have any blacksmiths, which proves that 3,000 years ago, 1000 BC, they had iron. They were making iron tools and implements and swords at this time. But they said, no blacksmiths for you. You're going to use our blacksmiths, and you're going to pay us a tax to be able to sharpen your tools, much less buy them. And the cost was a pim, which is about 2/3 of a shekel. So if you think, I think 30 shekels was the price of a slave, which, boy, I'm not remembering off the top of my head. Maybe about $6,000 if I remember my last calculations. So $200 per shekel. It's like about a day's wage. One shekel is like a day's wage. So that's a pretty 2/3 of a day's wage. $150 to go sharpen something. That's a pretty hefty fee just to sharpen it. So they were getting rich off them that way anyways. And so the garrison, so the Philistines were camped up in Michmash. There was 3 different directions, sent raiding parties out. So now the army is divided. It's divided. It's no longer in one place. That's a good sign militarily, actually. If you're going to attack, that's a good time to attack. They've divided themselves. Go after one at a time. But then they sent from Michmash another garrison up to the garrison on top of the hill at the pass of Michmash. And if you look at the maps, you can see this little winding path through the canyons between Geba and Michmash. And so the garrison went out, a smaller group, and reestablished itself on the hill to reestablish what Jonathan had destroyed, saying, we're back. We're back, and we're not going anywhere, and we're proving it. So anyways, that is all from 1 Samuel 13. And the main lesson is just no fear, once again. Everything about Saul's life is don't imitate him. And he's not viewed as a hero of the faith. Everything he did was motivated by fear and insecurity. And we too often excuse ourselves. We excuse ourselves all the time. We say, it's natural to be afraid. It's natural to be insecure. I don't want to be prideful. But we need to resolve ourselves to the truth that fear and insecurity are affronts to God because they demonstrate a lack of trust in him. A suspicion that he doesn't want to help you. A suspicion that he's not strong enough, that he doesn't care enough, that he's not powerful enough, that he won't act on your behalf, that he won't intervene, that you care more about your life and your well-being than God does. And none of those fears empower God to help you, but he does respond to faith. If we choose to trust him, he shows up. So ask him to grant you faith. Search your heart. Anywhere you have insecurities or fears in your relationships, you're afraid of what your spouse might do, afraid of what your children might do, afraid of what your parents might do, afraid of what your friends might do, afraid of what your boss may do, afraid of tithing because it may cause you to not have enough money, afraid to rest on the Sabbath because you're afraid you won't get enough done, afraid to tell the truth at work because it might cost you your job. Wherever you might have a fear, erase it. Turn to God, get on your knees and say, Father, I repent of my fear. Forgive me for the sin of fear and grant me faith. And let's trust him in every place. Trust him. He is a good shepherd. He is powerful. He is close. He does love you. He's just waiting on you to trust him. But trust is shown through action. You can't show faith. You have to show faith, not just say you have faith. Show faith by waiting on the Lord, as Saul should have waited on Samuel. All right, so that's all for today. We'll see you guys soon. Have a great afternoon.